Welcome back. Welcome back. This is the People's Voice. I am Trey Evans, and I am the People's Voice. Thank you again for checking out the podcast this week. As always, it is greatly appreciated. As always, we thank everyone who has taken some time to listen to the podcast today. We do understand that you could be utilizing your time to do something else, so we are appreciative that you're taking that time to spend with us. As always, if this information is valuable and you find it to be enlightening and worth sharing, we ask that you subscribe to the podcast and turn on notifications. That way you can be notified when each episode is released. And we do put out a new episode each and every Friday, which is heard on all podcast platforms. And then we also put a video out on YouTube as well for those who would like to watch the podcast. But in any event, as we always say, welcome and welcome to the People's Voice podcast. So today, I want to get into the topic of wage theft. Wage theft. And I want to cover this today because it is not a new concept at all, but it is definitely something that is practiced and occurs far more often than some people may realize. So I want to cover that today. I want to cover the topic of wage theft. What is wage theft? Theft, for those of you who may not know what that terminology is. Who's most affected by it? Where is it occurring? And then, some of the things that are being done to address it, to at least try to curb some of what is occurring in regards to wage theft. So that's what we'll talk about today. We'll talk about wage theft. And I guess to get started, like I said, I want to give a definition of what wage theft is, because some people may not know what that is. Now, I did a typical research just to kind of give myself a stronger understanding of it. I know it from a higher level, but I like to get granular sometimes, so I am clear about what I'm saying before disseminating any information. But I first went to an organization called the Economic Policy Institute. And they did a great breakdown of this a couple of months ago to kind of give a report of what wage theft is. And they gave a lot of great information about, some of the dollar figures and things of that nature. So to define wage theft, and let me just pull that up from there. It says wage theft. What is wage theft? Wage theft is the failure to pay workers the full wages to which they are legally entitled to or entitled. Wage theft can take on many forms, including but not limited to minimum wage violations, overtime violations, off the clock violations, meal break, illegal deductions, tip, minimum wage violations, and worker classification violations. So wage theft can cover many different aspects of the employee or labor experience. So I kind of, like I said, I want to give a clear definition of what that could be, because like myself, when my understanding of wage theft has pretty much been, limited to basically person goes to work and doesn't get paid what they said they were going to get paid. And basically you are, having your wages taken or stolen. But as you can see here in this definition, wage theft covers a wide spectrum of different aspects. In terms of the dollar amounts, right? Because that's what I'm always looking for right after I get the information. And based on this same report from the Economic Policy Institute, they said that their report, and they looked at the years between 2021 and 2023, they said their report showed more than $1.5 billion in stolen wages were recovered for workers between 2021 and 2023. Now, the interesting thing about that number, because you might hear that number and go, wow, 1.5 billion. Well, these workers are getting their money back, but not so fast. In that same report, they estimate that throughout the country, you have workers who have possibly lost somewhere up to $15 billion annually from stolen wages. I'm reading here about their background and prior studies, and it says wage theft is a costly and pervasive problem that affects millions of workers across the country. For example, Cooper and Kroger investigated just one type of wage theft, which is minimum wage violations. And that's typically when workers are getting paid less than not only the state minimum wage, but also the federal minimum wage, which in most states is different. Anyway, in that report, it found that in the 10 most populous states in the country, 17% of the eligible low-wage workers reported being paid less than minimum wage, which amounted to about 2.4 million workers. And out of those 10 states, those 2.4 million workers, it was estimated that they lost about $8 billion annually in wages. It goes on to say, basically taking the information from those 10 states, they then put together an estimate, and they came up with a possible total that throughout the country, at one point, low wage workers lost almost $15 billion annually from minimum wage violations alone. So, this is obviously not a small problem. It is a huge problem. And, there are things that can be done to address these violations. If you are a service worker or someone who works for tips or minimum wage, things of that nature. So I'll kind of get into that as I move forward in the conversation here. But just to round out, it also went on to say that basically between a 4-year period, 2017 to 2020, they estimated almost $3.24 billion was stolen in stolen wages, were recovered in a 4-year period. But again, if you're talking about $15 billion annually, that is truly just a drop in the cup. Now, these violations are supposed to be addressed obviously at the state level, but then also at the federal level, right? The FLSA, which is the Fair Labor and Standards Act, is a federal law that basically helped to establish minimum wage, overtime pay, and child labor standards. I think that bill was enacted in 1938. So from a federal level, these type of violations are supposed to be addressed. But then at the state level as well, there are certain states that have protections in place to address these type of issues. But what is often happening is that these issues are not being addressed on the state level, because obviously you have a ton of companies who are utilizing and willing their influence, if you will, to kind of get around some of those laws on the state level, and definitely not adhering to a lot of the laws on the federal level. In terms of, well, let me go back. So, what type of workers are typically affected by this? Let me cover that first. So, typically, you see wage theft happen often in service orientated jobs. So everything from house cleaning, housekeepers. You have definitely in agricultural, especially in agricultural, heavy agricultural states like California and other Midwest states. You have a lot of wage theft. You see it a lot, which many people may not know, and I didn't even know until I did this, started doing the research in the car wash business, which is something that I didn't even think about, in terms of the people that typically, I don't know about you at your car wash, but when I go to my car wash, typically, it is either immigrants or people who have come to the country and haven't yet established citizenship, but they typically are the victims of wage theft. And it's not just in those type of jobs. It can also even happen in restaurants. You have a lot of wage theft occurs when that fine line of independent contractor and gig work and things of that nature. You see that occur a lot of times as well. But from many of the reports, it usually is the people that are most effective are typically women, immigrants, and people of color, are usually the most vulnerable, or usually the most targeted of individuals when it comes to wage theft. Matter of fact, let me play this clip from Community Legal Services of Philadelphia. They interviewed a restaurant worker by the name of Catherine, and she talked about being a victim of wage theft, and she worked in a restaurant in Philadelphia. So let me play that, and then I'll continue and go on from there. This is Catherine again.
My name is Catherine. I am a former restaurant worker here in Philly, and I experienced wage theft from my employer. It was a late check, and then check doesn't show up, and a week later I still don't have my check, and no timeline of when I can expect to be paid, and then I missed a second check. I just felt like the employer was going to continue to do this, but still expect my labor. So I posted on TikTok in order to try to bring some more public awareness and pressure the employer to pay myself and the other workers.
And that story that, again, Catherine from I guess it was on the Community Legal Services of Philadelphia, is often too common, especially again when you start talking about workers that are in service industries such as herself. And this is something that occurs from a state to state level, in all states across the country, but there are definitely states that it occurs in more than others. I was reading a study that was done earlier this year, and I'm reading this from Yahoo News, and it lists the top 10 states. It says here, top 10 worst states for wage theft, average back wages owed per employer. And according to this study, the 10 states that have come in as the worst states for wage theft are Maryland, Delaware, Virginia, Florida, New Jersey, New Hampshire, Iowa, Massachusetts, Washington State, and then South Carolina. And the wages that they list here, and for those of you who are watching YouTube, these wages are the amount that that employee was owed pretty much after that entire year of not being paid. So, for instance, in Maryland, based on this study, wage theft cost individual employees almost $2,200 annually. And now that's, again, we're talking about big money because this is for individuals who are making minimum wage or are in low wage paying jobs. So 2,200 could literally be the difference between feeding a family, even having shelter and housing. It's a huge difference. So what is being done? As I said before, the Fair Labor Standards Act was or is supposed to be what is enforced or should be enforced to address any employer who is not paying their employees adequately. But that has proven to not be enough because it requires the DOL, the Department of Labor, to get involved. And oftentimes the Department of Labor, due to the number of cases and obviously resources, cannot get to everyone. So what has been happening, or what has been sitting on the table, if you will, for quite a number of years, has been what has been known as the Wage Theft Protection, the Wage Theft Prevention and Wage Recovery Act. And this was an act that was originally put forth in 2022. And this act is supposed to basically strengthen what has already been in place with the Fair Labor Standards Act. Now, this act, again, was introduced in 2022 and it still hasn't been passed. But some of the things that it addresses immediately is that it addresses workers' compensation. It increases transparency in terms of employment pay. It requires, employers to pay all wages owed to an employee, and it ensures that workers will receive a full and final check. It then goes on to also strengthen the type of penalties that can be levied against employers who participate in wage theft, which includes increasing the damages that wage theft victims are entitled to when they go through class action lawsuits, as well as strengthening protections for workers who are illegally retaliated against. Because another huge issue with wage theft is that if and when these things are reported, many times there are employers who will retaliate against these employees, especially when you start talking about immigrant employees, and retaliate by telling them that they won't be able to work, or their hours will be cut, and other threatening gestures to get them not to speak. But there is legislation, and I'm talking federally because, again, as I said, there are states that do have strong wage theft protection acts and wage recovery type acts. I know New York is one, for instance, but again, it is not on a federal level. And that's where the trouble comes in, because a lot of these companies based in the states that they're in, they know how to navigate and get around some of those acts that may be in effect locally. Last but not least, this has lasting effects, because oftentimes, especially when you're dealing with wage theft, especially when you start dealing with gig workers, because gig work is very big now, independent contractors, what many people may not know is that there are often have been cases of wage theft when it comes to independent contractors. But also, once you're labeled as an independent contractor, you are not making a contribution to Social Security, which later on in life, and of course we're talking years later, but a lot of people may be working 10, 15 years as independent contractors. This can play a big role. Let me play this really quick from an auditor in Denver who talked about this, and then I'll close out from there. So,
long term, and I mean very long term, when people go to retire and collect Social Security, they're not going to have a record of being paid if they're independent contractors, and they will not be able to collect Social Security.
Obviously.
And I just wanted to play that. So that's another kind of caveat, if you will, regarding wage theft and what has to be done to kind of curb that. Now, if you choose to be an independent contractor, that's fine, but just understand that you too have protections as well, because what happens sometimes in these low wage opportunities is that employers will label employees as independent contractors so they don't have to reimburse Social Security, but at the same time, the independent worker themselves is not reaping the benefits from that. So just another caveat in terms of, what occurs in cases of wage theft. But that's what I wanted to cover today. I want to talk about wage theft. There's a ton of information about this, so I definitely will put these links into the video for those who want to check it out on our YouTube page. Of course, if you want to leave a comment, you can leave a comment for us at the People's Voice Podcast on Instagram. You can also reach out to me at I am Trey Evans on all social media platforms. And then, of course, you can leave a comment on the YouTube channel. You guys have definitely been leaving a lot of comments, and we appreciate it, and try to answer all of them as soon as I can. But that's what I wanted to cover today. So hope this information was valuable, and please spread the information because that's the only way it becomes effective, if it's spread and then acted upon. But as always, dreams are not just for sleeping. Please wake up and live your dreams. My name is Trey Evans, the People's Voice. Tell somebody about the dream. Salute.